In 1980, during the Dirty War, Maria de Cortes's 20-year-old daughter was taken by Argentina Navy. As a result, she became a member of the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, a group of mothers of disappeared children who had weekly vigils for their children in a plaza opposite to the presidential palaces in Buenos Aires. Leonda was one of the estimated 500 children of 30,000 disappeared people to have been kidnapped by the government or born in detention during military dictatorship that ran the country from 1976 to 1983. Most of the children were given to military families who would raise them to be upstanding, law-abiding citizens. The appropriations were partly to solve a practical problem. If the real identities of the children were known, there would have to be an explanation for what happened to their parents.
We realize that to demand the fulfillment of human rights is a revolutionary act, and to question the government about bringing our children back alive was a revolutionary act. We were fighting for liberation, to live in freedom, and that was a revolutionary act. To transform a system is always revolutionary.
My name is Leyenda Karina Kanzas, and it took me 15 years to reclaim my lost identity. I grew up in Argentina with my adoptive parents. My biological father was shot dead in front of me, and my mom disappeared in 1978. My adoptive parents changed my name and called me Cassandra.
Then, in 1946, Perón was elected president. Perón set Argentina on a course of industrialization and state intervention in the economy, calculated to provide greater economic and social benefits for the working class. Perón dictated the political life of the country by his command of the armed forces. He severely restricted and in some areas eliminated constitutional liberties. He was overthrown on September 19, 1955, after an Army-Navy revolt led by democratically inspired officers who reflected growing popular discontent with inflation, corruption, and oppression. The military regime of General Alejandro Lanús, which took power in March of 1971, proclaimed its intention to restore constitutional democracy by the end of 1973 and allow the re-establishment of political parties, including the Peronist Party. Upon invitation from the military government, Perón returned to Argentina for a short time in November 1972. In 1973, he was elected president, and at his insistence, his wife became vice president. While in exile, Perón had wooed the left-wing Peronists and had supported the most belligerent labor unions. Once returned to power, however, he formed close links with the armed forces and other previously opposition right-wing groups. When he died in 1974, he left to his widow and successor as president an untenable situation. Isabel Perón failed to obtain the firm support of any power group, not even the labor unions. Terrorist activity and political violence ensued. On March 24, 1976, the armed forces took power, removed Isabel Perón from office, and set up military junta.
It all started out well, He made so many promises. We saw our economy start to recover, but it was so short-lived. Pretty soon he started censoring our newspapers. Our freedom of speech was so limited. We only say and heard what he wanted us to. The punishment for everything, every little thing was so severe, nobody would stand up to him. And the labor unions that supported him. We were all elated when he was overthrown by the military, though we didn't exactly realize that the trouble was only beginning.
The establishment of the apartheid came from the racial segregation and white supremacy that had become the central aspects of South African policy. And this came from the social Darwinism and the imperialism of the previous ages. One of the biggest things that happened in the beginnings of the apartheid was the controversial Land Act of 1913, which passed 3 years after South Africa gained its independence, and marked the beginning of a territorial segregation through forcing black Africans to live in reserves and making it illegal for them to work as sharecroppers. Another part of the establishment came from the Great Depression and World War II that brought economic woes to South Africa, as they were used as almost banks for the bigger countries. In 1948, the Afrikaners National Party won the general election under the slogan apartheid, which literally means separateness. Their goal was not only to separate South Africa's white minority from the non-white majority, but also to separate non-whites from each other and divide black South Africans along tribal lines in order to decrease their political power. By 1950, the government had banned marriages between white and the people of other races and prohibited sexual relations between black and white South Africans. The Population Registration Act of 1950 also provided the basic framework for apartheid by classifying all South Africans by race, including Bantu, colored, and white, and a fourth category, Asian.
Rather than establishing stability and prosperity, 7 years of harsh military dictatorship brought Argentina to the brink of ruin. Realizing this, the new military leaders understood they would have to give up control to save the country. They allowed political parties to function again. General elections were set for October 1983. Raúl Alfonsín of the Radical Party, which had the support of Argentina's middle class, won the election. It was the nation's first truly free election in 40 years. Alfonsín knew that his number one job was to restore the rule of law to the country. To do that, he would require investigation into the offenses of the Dirty War. Shortly before the former government left power, it granted itself amnesty.
Well, you see, the amnesty laws mainly were created as a way to discourage the military from another coup. Before the military government turned power over to the new civilian government, those involved and guilty of crimes during the Dirty War gave themselves amnesty so they couldn't be prosecuted for their crimes. And the next 20 plus years, the civilian government sought to deal with these laws and convictions of military officers involved in the Dirty War. And the pressures and threats of a potential military revolt and coup led to the full stop and due obedience laws. These laws the full stop law limited the filing of new cases after 1986, and the due obedience law permitted military personnel from just using a just taking orders defense.
Alfonsín's progress was overturned when his successor, Carlos Menem, pardoned convicted military officers. It was over a decade until this decision was overturned and the amnesty laws were nullified in 2003 and deemed unconstitutional by the Argentine Supreme Court afterwards.
This decision allowed charges to be brought against individuals thought to be responsible for murder or for torture. In fact, with this change, as many as 1,000 people could be charged for a past crime.
My father, he was a leader of both peaceful protests and armed resistance against the white minorities' oppressive regime in radically divided South Africa. His actions landed him in prison for nearly 3 decades and made him the face of the anti-apartheid movement, both within his country and internationally. Released in 1990, he participated in the eradication of the apartheid, and in 1994, he became the first black president of South Africa, forming a multi-ethnic government to oversee the country's transition.
My father was a great man and a great leader. His admirers see him as a man who, since the demise of the apartheid, has been active in the defense of human rights and uses his high profile to campaign for oppressed. He has campaigned to fight HIV, AIDS, poverty, racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. He received many trophies for his amazing work. He was involved in a lot of things like the women's rights movements, gay rights, church reforms, and many other things.
In 1990, de Klerk released Nelson Mandela from prison, and together they initiated reform. They developed a new constitution for South Africa that would represent all South Africans and allowed ANC and other organizations to speak freely, and repealed most of the apartheid laws.
Well, you see, with the apartheid and the racial supremacy, it was recognized that the systematic oppression could go on no longer. After all, we are the new generation, and the racism in our country was of the old generation, not us. The effect on the people of South Africa was too great, and I couldn't and wouldn't let our country destroy itself under my watch. There's still work to be done, and with race relations, currently, as there always is, but it will be done with time.
The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC, was set up by the Government of National Unity to help deal with what happened under apartheid and keep the democracy in place. The conflict during this period resulted in violence and human rights abuses from all sides. No section of society escaped these abuses.
These days, both countries face a number of issues. Racial tensions still remain in South Africa, and the socioeconomic status is often split between racial lines. Even with the growing economy, the path towards reconciliation will definitely be turbulent.
Today in Argentina, economic uncertainty has mostly dissipated. However, the trials of military officers suspected of human rights violations remains. The scars of the past will remain in the victims, however, much like in South Africa. I'm Steve Ricks. Adios. Thanks for watching.